Hi, testing. My name is Codruța Bunia, and I'm glad that you're here for this webinar, Dive into API Testing. I hope that you are fine, and I hope that you're going to enjoy today's session. If you are going to have questions during the session, please add them in the question. There is a section down the tool, and you can add the questions during the session or at the end of the session. At the end of the session, we are going to respond the questions that you are having. Okay. So today is the third section of the automation part, webinars, and we are going to dive into the API testing today a little bit. Our focus would be to see what's an API, how we can approach testing. So if I need to start, if we are talking about manual testing, or if I'm talking about UI automation testing, as a tester, I have faced at a given point different situations in which I could no longer face the amount of tests. At the end of the sprint, you know, the pressure, number of tests, and I could not deliver the results to my team as I wanted. And I wanted to move with testing a little bit faster and early in the development process. One solution was to focus more on the API testing area. API has become the backbone of programming, presenting an opportunity to break through the barriers that prevent us from being effective earlier in the development cycle. And then can help us to accelerate testing and to increase our efficiency. The question that is here, how we can start with it. In this webinar, I will provide you some tips and tricks on why API testing is really an asset to the testing activities by answering to the three questions. Why, what, and how to write automated tests at the API level. For those of you who are not yet familiar with the API testing, I will provide some basic concepts of understanding on the need that you can take that to your teams. So before going into answering the questions, I would like to make some introduction of what an API is for those of you who checked the section that you don't have too many knowledge for the API part. API stands for Application Programming Interface and defines those kinds of requests that can be made or how to make them, the data formats that should be used, and the conventions to follow. If we are taking a look at this picture, we have here the client who is going to make a request to the business logic where we have the API. The API in this case is that one that is going to create and compute the request and collect the data from the database and server and gives us back the result. If we are taking into consideration a client-server communication, for example, we see that during our actions through HTTP, we can create, read, update, or delete a resource. And how actually this is working in an API. For example, we are going to have a request to create a new entry. And for that, we are creating a post request, send the URL, and also send the payload to the server in order to create the entity. And the server is going to respond us with a response code in case of success, 201, and the location that was created on the server. In case that we want to read a specific information, then we send a request, a GET request to the server. We send the endpoint to the server, and we are going to get back the payload from the server. In case that we would like to update a specific request, we are going to send the put request to the server. We are going to have a URL that we are going to send also the ID of the item we are going to update, plus the payload of the data. And we are going to receive back 200 response from the server in case of success. And of course, the fourth main request is the delete request, where we can send the URL and we can send ID. And we are going to send receive 200 response in case the request is successful. Those are the main requests that we can make. So in order for us to create, read, update, and delete specific resources from our API, we can use these four main requests, HTTP requests: post, put, get, and delete. Okay, for example, let's say that on UI level, we are having two forms. One of the form in the left is to add new employee, where we can provide the name, the salary, and the age. We enter all the details there and we save it. In that time, there is a request actually sent to our API. It's a post request sent to the server in order to create the employee. Also, we can view the employee, the right side, and we can also edit and delete the resource. I took as an example for our webinar today an API, which is actually a dummy REST API, which is created by example to exemplify what requests can be made through an API. So this API will expose methods like get to get all the employees, or to get only one employee in this case, or it provides us post requests to create new employees, and this is the URL associated, and also we can update and delete having the URLs provided. How this functions. Also for the example that we have in here for this one, when we are going to have a get request, and when we want to get the information from a specific employee, let's say employee with ID 1, then we are going to make the get request, and the API will return us this result. So it's going to return the format with all the resource data from the server. In case we would like to have a post request, then we are going to use the post request URL, and we are going to add also this JSON, this payload to the server in order for the server to know exactly how many, what data to create. And we have this result from the server with the success and the data which was created and ID associated. In case that we would like to delete a specific ID, then we are going to use the delete URL, a specified delete method, and the results from the server will be received that the resource was deleted. So this is the example of the API that can give you more details if you're not already familiar with it. If you're already familiar with the API and already tested it, you know that the fundamental the fundamental concept of an API is the resource. The resource is presented as an object like this with a specific type and associated data and specific relationships with different other resources from the APIs and a set of methods that can operate with it. Resources have associated a specific resource model, which can be represented in JSON or XML. Usually right now it's more represented in JSON format, and is modulated by the key value pairs of data, which can be a scalar, an array, or an object. What does this mean? So for example, we have this entire is an array collection of multiple resources because we have two resources here. This one is the resource object. It's actually the entire data that we need for this employee. Those are the scalar values, meaning that the values for each of the key can be a string, an integer number, a Boolean value, a date field, or something like this. And of course, we have another example in which some specific key has value another object. So this is a sub-collection of sub-resources. So this is in big lines the sum up the intro part. So why should we talk about API testing and what API testing is actually? So we start to ask ourselves the question why this is important. As most of you already know, the API is that type of software testing that involves the testing of the API, the application programming interface, directly in part of the integration testing phase. And its scope is to determine if the functionality and reliability and performance or security of our API are as the user wants to be. Okay, we have different API testing types. We can start from the functional testing, where the API works and does exactly what it's supposed to do. We also have reliability testing, where we check if our results are consistent enough and the API is reliable. We have the load testing, where we can check the performance of our API and to see how large amount of requests our API can accept. We can have the security part, where we are focusing on including authentication, permissions, or access control types of tests. We have API documentation testing. It's kind of static testing, as we all know from the manual part, but the focus is to test and check the documentation if it has an easy guide to the users. And of course, the tricks and for the testing part, the negative testing, which we are checking for every kind of wrong input the user can possibly add to our API. Okay, but the question resides here. Why do we need API testing? So at the beginning, when I did a lot of UI testing and manual testing, I know, yeah, it's API testing, the same thing. So why is that why should I even bother with it? And after that, after I started to do API tests, when I see the benefits that can be added to my resources, then I include the API test almost in all the projects which I work. So the benefits that I learned so far are 6 of them. So first of all, the test for the core functionality. As you already noticed in the API example, when we are dealing with the APIs, we don't have access to our user interface, but actually we are having access to all the functionalities that are presented for that specific model or that specific area from our application. Actually, what API does, it tests the core. The most important features are going to be tested. And the benefit is that we can have an early evaluation of what is done there. This one, the second one, relates a lot from the beginning of my presentation. The fact that I need to have some more effective time for running the test. So let's say API tests are more time effective, actually are computed and making a sum up of all the tests being done. It was proven that the API tests are 35 times faster in execution than the UI automation tests. And for the one UI test, which goes to 7 minutes on execution, because it needs to open the browser, it needs to add data, and needs to process and click on the buttons and all the operation on the UI part, it can go to 7 minutes. Also, when we are going to have an API test, then the same API test for the same functionality can go to 0.12 minutes, sorry, which is quite a lot of improvement and quite a lot gain in time for this part. For making our test more effective and having the results more, let's say, more faster than we usually have. Another benefit is that we can have a reduced cost. So the reduced cost is a little bit related with the time effective window, but not just the fact that I'm having the results much faster, but the fact that I can have results faster provided to the developers, and the developers will resolve the defects early in the development process. And as early as a defect is found and is fixed, then we are going to lower the cost, not only on the testing part, but we can lower the cost only on the also on the development part. We can also have greater testability. It's more like 30, 50 times less in maintenance. What's happening is that while graphical user interface are dynamic and may change to accommodate new requests from the users. That is one point. And the second point is when we are going to write the UI test, we are going to use a lot the interaction with the browser, and we need to identify a lot of elements in order to run our test. But all of these are not found in the API testing. So the API will remain more stable or more less maintenance required for us during the testing process. Also, one of the things for the API is that we are easy to integrate with the UI or graphical interface. For example, we can combine our API test with our UI test, more like in having success in having faster test data. Because I know that multiple times when you have a UI test, you need to have a specific test data in your system in order for you to be able to create something or do something on the UI part. So having the API test can integrate it, we can create faster the test data that we need in our UI test. And of course, the last one, as we mentioned, that the format of the API and the resource model for the API resides in XML or JSON, it's easy for us to select any language that we would like in order to be able to automate it. So that will be another great gain that we can have for the API tests. Okay, those are the benefits. How we can start? Well, if we take into consideration, and I think that you know the testing pyramid, the ideal way of having the test defined and the ideal way of constructing our test for the application, we know that we have unit tests at the basis, and we know that we have component testing and integration testing at the middle layer, and we have the UI functional testing, even if that is done at the UI part automated, or even if it's done manual part. Well, the idea is that the recommendation is the growth of the API test in this pyramid. So basically the API test can be found in this area. And as more tests we have in this area than on the functional UI part, the less we can make sure that our core of the application is more stable. Okay, this is why. The second question is, okay, we know the API. We know the concepts besides that. We know the importance of the API. The idea is what we are going to test, what we are going to focus on, and how we are going to construct our approach in this area. One of the things that I like to say about testing in general is before starting to automate something or before starting to create the test, think about the approach, think about a lot of the context. So the first thing that I would like to add here is to discover the context of the business, the context of the API, and discover who will be the API consumer, who is going to use our API. Is going to use only on one page, is going to be distributed to multiple pages, or is going to be set up publicly. So it's very important to know what is our API and what our API does. The second one is to focus on a plan in order for us to treat our API as a product. As we are focusing on the UI part, when we are going to manual test a specific functionality, in the same way we can adopt to this part with API, to create a strategy, to create a plan, to create a framework, to treat our product, our API as a product. The third step would be to understand the API. Understand how the API function, understand the API endpoint, and to be able to find all the nouns and pick the operations that the API is going to use. For example, I know that my API has like 4 different endpoints. 2 of them interact with each other, the other ones are not interacting, or all of them are interacting. Specific endpoints can can create, update, delete, but all the others only can read data. So it's very important to know which are those operations that the API can do. Then it's very important to identify the input parameters and types for each of the resources from each of the endpoints. Basically, this is related very much with all the input data that you can add, or you can create, or you can delete for your API. And of course, you need to specify and highlight which is different and which is specific to your API in this context. For example, if you have different roles or if you have different accesses to your API, you need to know that in order for you to include them in your test. What is different, basically, most of the time can have multiple errors. Okay. How to approach this further on? When we are dealing with API and the API testing, we know that there are 3 areas in which we need to focus. So first area is represented by the contract tests. Those contract tests represent how to interact with the interface, what services are available, and how to invoke them. It's more related to the message requests and responses and to make sure that they are semantically correct. Basically, during a contract test, I need to make sure that a specific request, which is the mandatory request, can be established. And when the client makes a request to the server, the API responds successfully. Those can be represented as the main test in our structure. The second area is represented by the component testing. The component testing goes a little bit in more detail and takes each component or takes each endpoint in isolation and is going to test it in a lot of negative and positive data and validate what will be the responses or error messages that are coming back to the server. So instead of just creating a new employee, for this example, I can go in more details and try to provide different valid or invalid values for each employee field. Or I can add missing values, or I can add invalid payload formats, or I can test it with different roles and rights to see if that's going to function successfully. And of course, the third one, because for the first 2, I mostly take the endpoints in isolation, the third one will give me the possibility to test the system as overall. So it provides me the possibility to create different scenarios or create different behaviors or end-to-end tests to make sure that not just the specific one endpoint is going to function successfully alone, but is going to be to function successfully when it's integrated with different endpoints from my product or when it's integrated to different third-party systems, which are not actually in my product. But I want to make sure that it can interact with other systems and still work successfully. Or also for this one, I can create flows as I do on the UI part, end-to-end flows to validate the entire functionality from my application. Okay, this is for the approach part. The idea is that we know the API and we know the concepts, but the idea comes in, okay, how to test it. Actually, how to be able to test the product and to be able to provide the result that I would like to have. And even if sometimes it seems quite hard, especially at the beginning when you start to write your first test on the API part, actually in reality it's not that difficult once you start it. So let's see how to do it. So once we have the approach in place, we know the context, we know everything to do. One of the things is to be able to select a tool that will help you and will guide you to the testing part. First part is to be able to analyze and to see your needs from the tool, because having different teams, having different contexts, having different programming languages defined in all the projects, the tool can differ and the needs for you and your team can differ. So you can take a look and see what type of tools you would like to have and make an analysis of what's important to you. Even if you need a data-driven support tool, or if you need a tool which supports specific technology, or if you want a user-friendly tool, or you have a specific, you want a specific validation mechanism. You have, you want it to be without license, or you want to have a large community support, or you want to integrate it in CI. There are different goals or different characteristics that you can want from the tool. Second, to plan your POC, select the tools that you would like to have, create a schedule, create a result, and define the focus for the POC. In the definition of the focus for the POC is something like this. Usually when we make a POC, we are going to take the first thing that comes in our hand. If we are referring to the UI automation, we are going to start automating the login part. When we are dealing with API, we are going to start to perform a simple get. And after that, we say, okay, this is the tool for me. And we are going to start working with it. And after 1 or 2 weeks, we identify that the tool is not suitable for us because it's something missing or we don't support specific functionality. So the idea for this focus area is to identify not just the simple scenarios that you're having, but to identify for your POC also the, let's say, more complex scenarios, more complex API, more complex situations that you can see on your structure. Because if the tool can handle that situation, then that's a good tool. Tool adoption, you analyze the result, and of course you take the decision that fits for you. I define and put here some of the tools which are most used on the API level. I use a lot, and I really like JMeter, Rest Assured, Gatling, Postman. I really like those 4 tools, and I really use them. But you can also use any other tools that fits and they are suitable for you. One of the idea that I've learned from using the tools for the API testing is the fact that they bring me value. They add a lot of value in the context where I've been. But I learned a lot that the magic of successing in the API testing part is how we are going to approach testing, because basically all those tools are tools that can access a service over HTTP. But the idea is how suitable are those for you and how you are going to approach the testing part. Okay, further on how-to part, I would like to come back a little bit to those type of um, tests that we can have in the API. And once we have the tool, we can start with the implementation of the test. So in my test, I really like to start with the contract testing part. I like to start with each of the APIs that I'm having, each endpoint, and create the most important calls for them. So have the get, the post, the put, and delete for each endpoint to make sure that I can have access to each resource from each endpoint, and that the server is actually functioning correctly. And this is basically, let's say, if we compare to the UI testing part, this can be associated with so-called smoke test. Second of all, I like to take each of the components which I'm having, each endpoint, and from each endpoint to take it in isolation and start testing it for each detail that I consider relevant for that one. So even if we look at the parameters or the content type or at the response or error messages, I like to test the endpoint in details. And of course, at the end, not the last one, will be the scenarios. To be able to take one or two or three, I don't know how many are necessary endpoints, and to integrate them in a flow, even if it's an end-to-end flow or it's a smaller flow, but to be able to have scenarios to make sure that not just particular areas are functioning correctly, but all together are functioning correctly. Because at the end, our API is not just list of endpoints, it's a product that needs to work together. Okay, I would like to go into details on the component testing part and take each of them with some examples to be a little bit more detailed. So we have parameter tempering. Is the concept in which we can modify the parameters that we are sending in our URL. So for example, if we are having an URL at the second one where we also add a parameter to our call, which limit equals 1, for example, and limit will accept only integer values, then we can test and we can add different values for limit, longer integer values, strings, or characters, special characters, and so on, to be able to test all the parameters to make sure that the proper errors appear when they should be. The second one is related to the content type, but also is related to the headers. In order for our request from the client to server to function, we need to send a specific content type in our headers, because the server actually will accept the request only if it has the proper content type. For example, in our dummy REST API, we are having a JSON. If we are sending that JSON to our server to create a new resource, the server won't accept it because we haven't sent the proper content type. So the idea is also to test the headers, especially the content type, to see how the server behaves if we don't have any content type, or if we have a different content type, or if we are having actually an incorrect content type for our test. Another check for the component part would be for the response. We need to verify the received responses if it returns correct data, returned actually to check each content in each value for the data. So for example, if we have this request for the JSON part, we are going to check, we have this response from the server, then we are going to check if we have the status with value success, we have the employee name, Tiger, we have the salary for Tiger, and we have the correct age taken from the database. That's one of the checks that we can do for the response part. Another check that we can do is to validate the schema and to validate the schema for the payload on the request or the payload on the response. And we can do this by sending a wrong payload to the server. For example, in this case, I took comma out, or in this case, I changed the name and removed the E. For us to see and to be able to see how the server responds to an invalid payload, because it doesn't need to crash or it doesn't need to provide, I don't know, different scary errors. Another check that we need to do is for the error codes. Not just the 200 responses, but to force the application to crash, in order for us to be able to make sure that in case that we are going to have invalid values, or if we are having specific mistakes, our application actually works as expected. For example, in this case, we are sending a string for a salary, which requires an int value. And for this part, we need to check the error that is returned from the server. So, for example, I tried to create a new employee, but the employee that I tried to create the employee without being authenticated. Or I try to create the employee without having rights to create a new employee. So to force the API to fail, in order for us to be able to test that it actually fails as expected. Associated with the error codes are the error messages, where in the error messages, sometimes we get, for example, in case of an error, we get the correct response code. But there are cases in which we don't have a proper error message returned. And in most of the cases, the error message which are returned from the server are actually the errors which are displayed further on in the UI. So the idea is for us to make sure and to check for each our test that in case of an error in our payload or in our request, we are getting actually a correct response from the server. One of the most used and most liked parts will be the input data validation, where we take each of the inputs and we try to break the API with different values which we are sent to the server. Even if we send strings instead of integer values, even if we add values longer than the maximum accepted, or if we add special characters, the idea is to take each of the variables that we are having and to test them. For example, we have a string instead of, in this case, we have a string instead of an integer value. In this case, we are trying to add an already existing employee, Maria. Maria already exists and it's a unique name. And in the other case, we try to delete an employee which does not exist. So all these types of actions can be done in order for us to be able to identify all the errors that may appear to our system. Well, another one will be the security part. To create, for example, some cases in which we verify the security of our API. Create a new entry without being authenticated, or using an invalid token in order to create a new entry. Authenticate with a specific user role and try to access data that he doesn't have the rights to access, or introduce some specific sensitive values at the database level. Those are for the security area. And of course, one of the things that we all can do is to focus on define some specific time responses and see if our API will respond in a larger time than expected. Even if it's not a load test, even if it's just a simple test, it's very useful to add for each of your tests check to verify also if the request responded in more than a specific time that you would like to respond. So all of these are really helpful things that we can include and we can set up in order for us to define the component part of our API tests. Further on, I've created two examples of API structure, which I've selected to define them in rest assured. One of the examples which we discussed today was to create a new employee. So we would like to create a new employee, and in order to create that new employee, I selected the name Maria, salary 1 to 3. I wasn't too nice with Maria. Age 23. And for this test is great in rest assured. And rest assured in combination with the Gherkin language and Handcrest library. So the idea for this is like, okay, I'm having the given fact that I need to have my header content type, which will be content type. I need to be authorized with a specific token, which I authorized before. And I'm sending the body. The body, it's actually this payload, which is sent to the server. So given I'm having all of this and I'm having the body, when I create a post request to the endpoint for the employees, which is the endpoint for employees for post request, then rest assured will have the possibility to log all, meaning that you can have all your data logged in the responses. So everything that you send on the request or on the headers and everything that you will receive. Then I'm checking the status code for this to be 200. And then I'm checking that the status that I will receive from the response would be equal to success, because there is the response that we looked over, which is success. Then I need to have a key ID, because once we create a new employee, it's already going to generate a new ID for that employee. And I'm checking that to see that I'm having that ID. I'm checking to have the name, which will be expected to have based on the data which I've entered. And I need to have a salary, the same which I've entered, and the age, the same which I've entered. And another one, and besides all these checks for the responses, I would like to check then that the time in which the request is performed is less than 1 second in this case. This case is one second. But also I'm checking the time, and if one of these are going to fail, then my test is going to fail, and it's going to provide me with errors and messages for the failing area. This is for the success part. The second one is one test which actually needs to provide an error. So to try to create an employee with an invalid, actually I'm having a bug there, it's not email, it's just the salary. So it goes the same concept. I'm having the payload here with the wrong salary. Given the fact that I'm having the content type as header because it's required for the API, and I'm having already a token because I was authenticated before, and I'm having the invalid payload, when I'm going to post to the endpoint of the employees, then I need to have the specific status code, which is 400. I need to have for the body status to be failed, not success, as in the success case. I don't need to have a key for the ID, because I don't need to have in the response any ID generated because the case is invalid. Then also in my body, I need to test that, that my test doesn't have any exception. Because sometimes, even if the employee is not created, exceptions are not handled by the development side. So even if we have 400 and so on, the responses may have specific stack traces and exceptions return to our responses. So I'm checking also the fact that I don't have any exception. And of course, I'm checking if I'm having a specific error message, which is a friendly error message, which is going to provide it to the user. Invalid salary value provided, in this case for this specific case. Okay, so those are the examples. Rest assured, it's a very nice tool. Requires a lot of coding, but it's really easy to use. Once you set it up, then you can very easily reuse your functions with different other tests to combine. Some tips and tricks at the end. Test all the time for the most used and the most important results first. Start with the contract test, then go after that, go into details. Most of the cases you need to go to contract test, then to scenario, and then to details for the component. All the time when you have the possibility, add also the check for performance, because you can find sometimes, even you're doing functional testing, you can have and you can find sometimes some performance issues, and then we'll help you further on. Test a lot for failure. As you are doing on the UI part, or as you are doing on the UI automation area, test in this case also for failures. And once you're going to test for the core failures, focus on testing for the core failures only on the API part. Making sure that your API fails consistently and gracefully. Okay, structure your test in such a way that your structure will be based on components or functional area and are not distributed in different zones. Prioritize your API function calls. It's most important also for the developers and also working with the PO or the tech list of the team. Try to prioritize and try to start with the API functions as soon as the API is up and running. That's very important. Keep the test isolated as possible. Then perform the test and run the test each day. If you have the possibility, run the test each day. And don't forget to add checks and to maintain if there will be a problem or specific problems and so on. And for more complete test coverage, create test cases for possible API inputs combinations. As you know, as you've seen in the example, creating the test for specific negative cases is very easy in the API part, and it's very fast. So create negative tests for all the combinations that you can, because you will find a lot of problems in those areas. And another tip and trick, which is not added here, when you're doing API testing, but also you are doing UI testing in parallel for the same project, try to see the balance and try to make the balance between the test that you're doing on the UI part and the test that you're doing on the backend part. And try not to duplicate a lot the tests. And once you have the core in the API, focus more on the UI to have the end-to-end parts and don't have the small validation checks. Okay. So I think this ends our journey for the 3 questions. Why do we need to have API testing? Because it's very effective and it's going to help you a lot in testing the core. What to test? Focus on the 3 areas: contract, component, and scenario testing. How to test it? Choose a tool that fits you better and follow the tips and tricks that I also give you, or the things that you consider in order for you to be able to test properly your API. This session was quite, let's say, scratch of the surface on what and how you can start with API. For more details, and or if you would like to have more discussions about this part, don't hesitate to write me an email. Let's chat and let's see how's your API testing going and how you can make it better. Thank you very much. If there are some questions, I will happily ask them in the next minutes. So we have a question. So during the first rest assured example, you mentioned Gherkin with the library. What library did you say? It's Handcrest. Let me tell you something. Gherkin is for given when then, added here. Handcrest is to be able to create more fancy assets. So for example, equals to, less than, and those ones are from Handcrest. How do you handle test data? Okay, probably you can see from this side, you can handle test data a little bit different based on the tool that you're having. For this example, which I've put here, how I handle test data, I've created some basic payloads and structured them in external files in JSON format. I created a function to read the JSONs from the files, and where is the case where I needed to have necessary unique value, I added a random value generator. And I've created a class, as you can see here, employee name and so on. And based on this class, I'm extracting and have access to that data which I've added here in the payload. I'm not sending the payload as a string, because if I'm sending the payload as a string, then I cannot have unique values, or I cannot be able to get data exactly as it is, because all the time I need here to put strings, and I don't usually like that. I hope, Razvan, that I've responded to your question. Rest assured with BDD approach is recommended, or rest assured with TestNG? Well, I use both. I like both. I used, first of all, exactly rest assured with Cucumber in one example with Java. And I used, in the other example, rest assured, I haven't used it with TestNG, I used it with JUnit, with JUnit, I'm sorry. I liked both approaches, but if you would like to have something really, really fast, I will select the approach with JUnit or TestNG. In order for you to have it with BDD approach, it's very nice, and also the POs can use it and read it, but it's more like time consuming. Where in the code do you generate your authentication token? Okay, I'm having a token which is generated before the functions itself. There are two approaches that you can use, or which I've used. You can generate a token for all the tests for a specific endpoint in your test suite, because you don't just need only one token for all of them. But I also use a different approach where it's a little bit more different than this one, because it creates quite a wrapper of a rest assured. And once you create the wrapper of the rest assured, when you have the post request, it automatically creates a new token. So each request that is created, and for each of the tests, is going to use a different token. So you can have both of them, depends on how you would like to structure the tests. Okay, how do you collect, compare, and visualize automation results? Well, there are two options. You can run your test as you run your test right now in your tool and collect the data from there. I usually like to use also for the UI part, but not just for the UI part, but also for the API part. There is a library that you can, I'm missing the name right now, but I'm going to search it one sec. There is a very nice library for Java or also for C# that you can use with integrating your tests. One second. I'm just having I'm not sure if in English it's called lapsus, but I just forgot right now. Okay. Are there any other questions?
Yes, there were two questions still in the answered part.
Okay, what is the recommends for API testing? Can you give a list of best tools? Yeah, well, it's this one. Yeah, depends on how easy it is for you to use any of these. So for example, JMeter and Gatling doesn't, or Postman and SOAP-UI doesn't need that much knowledge of automation. Rest of programming language, rest assured requires more of them. So it depends on how you would like to use it. It's possible to run rest assured, yes. Yes, it's also possible to integrate it in Jenkins or in any CI that you would like to have. Okay, any other questions? Sander, I'm coming to you with the response. I'm using it, but I forgot about it. I'm so sorry about that. It has a very simple name, that's why. Come on. Or you can write me an email and I promise you I'm going to come back. Oh, we have another question. Can you show as an example for an end-to-end flow with rest assured? Right now, during this recording session, I cannot. But if you would like us to have more details and discuss in more details, don't hesitate to send me an email so we can schedule and discuss about that in more details. Okay, thanks. Looking forward for a short framework structure. Okay, good. We can do that, sure. Okay, so I'm coming back to you, Sanders, is extend reports. Extend reports is the library that you can integrate for also UI part, but also you can have it to your API test. Okay. Are there any questions? Okay. Thank you very much for joining and see you at the next session. Have a great day.